Super Progressive, what is good? This is a very, very special episode of the Super Progressive podcast. Today, we are joined by Sasha. Now, as you all know, Sasha has been working with Amplifyd to do an auction of the vinyl and the acetates that he used to mix his legendary Global Underground 13 Ibiza mix compilation. Amplifyd helped me set this interview up with him. We really didn't have much of Sasha's time. He's super busy, but he was nice enough to join us for a quick chat. And because of that, we really focus on the stories behind the Global Underground 13 and Ibiza mix compilation. Now, if you've been following me for the past 4 years on my journey, you know that 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour interview with Sasha is definitely the ultimate goal. It will happen soon, but I really just can't thank Amplifyd enough. I can't thank Sasha enough for joining us, and I'm really, really proud of this episode, and I hope that you can learn something new about what seems to be clubbers around the world, like one of the most important mix compilations of all time. So let's get into it. Your GU13 in Ibiza, you're based in Ibiza now. To me, what was so interesting was that I was only like 5 when this came out, but even then it seemed like Ibiza was kind of at this crux point where it was like the club scene was becoming super commercialized, but there was also this magic of Ibiza. And kind of the first question to represent this CD was, what was the decision like to bring Global Underground 13 to Ibiza, and was it something you were nervous about at all?
It was something that I personally wasn't nervous about. I really pushed for this to happen. The guys from Global Underground, on the other hand, were really against it at the beginning because at the time, any kind of Ibiza compilation was just synonymous with cheesy. We used to call it handbag music because the girls would dance around the handbags. And Ibiza didn't really have a very kind of cool rep at the time, But I knew what was going on at clubs like Space. That was my favorite place to play, which is now High. That was, the after hours at Space was my favorite place to go. You might go to Pasha Amnesia or somewhere else first, and then you'd always head to Space. Sometimes 9-10 in the morning, and it would be going off there all day, and that was my favorite. The terrace outside was magical, but I used to love going into the dark room inside and kind of getting lost in there lost in the music for hours. So there was nothing out there in the kind of public domain in terms of people writing about it that much, or that really kind of captured what was going on there, the kind of cool, the cooler sound of it and the cooler side of it. And it was all everything associated with Ibiza was pretty cheesy, so the guys at Global Underground really tried to talk me out of doing it to start off with, but I kind of talked them round, and I was pretty insistent that this is where I wanted to do it from. And a lot of the photographs that are from Ibiza are kind of in and around Space as well. The kind of famous one when we're sitting on the roof of Space when the plane goes overhead. That was the club for me that I used to absolutely love that place. I was gutted when it changed hands, and I actually still have never managed to bring myself to go to High yet.
Wow.
I've never even been. I was actually supposed to DJ there this summer for the first time, and but it didn't come off in the end. But Space for me was one of the greatest clubs ever.
Well, it's really cool because for me as a journalist, Dom Phillips was like my number one journalism hero, and I kind of discovered his work through discovering Global Underground for the first time, which was only a few years ago. He asked you a question during that interview session on the roof near Space about if the Global Underground itself, these small pockets of underground culture around the world, was a real thing. And I think that's a great question to have about Ibiza, because you kind of showed this underground side to it that
Right.
not many people were maybe aware of, and you kind of just spoke to that. But it's really cool.
Yeah, I think, there was way less tourism to Ibiza back then. The island's now full of Americans and in the summertime, but back then Americans were pretty scarce. It didn't have the travel connections, the flight connections, and even it just didn't have the foot traffic that it has now, or the people's awareness of Ibiza around the world. So yeah, most of people's awareness of Ibiza was based on these huge cheesy compilations that companies like Ministry of Sound would put out, which really was it's a relevant part sound of the island. It's the kind of the cheesier commercial side of it, but it certainly didn't tell the whole story. So, and the fact that we could take a photographer to Ibiza and shoot on these locations around Ibiza, no one had ever done that before and presented it in that way. And the dean, the GU photographer, is such a great photographer. I'd worked with him on the San Francisco CD. I knew there were places in Ibiza we could shoot that would look stunning. So yeah, I eventually talked them round into it, and I think they were very happy once they committed to it and realized it was all coming together. I think they were really happy they'd made that decision. But yeah, I definitely had a lot of pushback from them. They were like, Ibiza, don't be daft.
That's awesome. Let's move into the tracks. And I will say I got to go on the photo shoot for Danny's Global Underground 45 in Brooklyn. Dean
All
Belcher is
right.
one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's really, really awesome. All right, I want to start with Jesse Skeen's Medway, this
Yeah.
bassline track acetate. David told me that when you were going through the kind of the record collection, you had said that the version of this acetate and the way that it was cut just sound better than any version that came after
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I always, this is how I always used to get music. This is kind of pre-internet and stuff. People would either send in the post, registered delivery DATs, or they would bike them round. They would, I'd get a message saying that, that a bike would be coming round, or a knock on the door and a bike would turn up. And this happened quite often. I had an office address in London, but DATs would turn up just out of the blue. So every week I had a cutting session, but booked. I by the end I always ended up using a company called 777, and there was an incredible mastering engineer there. Um, his name has just slipped my mind. Let me grab it back because I was
That
just
Arjun?
sorry.
Not Arjun, is it? Or he was the owner, I think. Chakravarti or something. Or maybe Arun
Arun.
without
Yeah,
Arun. No
that's it.
J.
So I used to have an incredible relationship with a amazing cutting engineer at a company called 777 in London, called Aaron, and he was just an absolute wizard. I would send him basically a bag of DATs every week to get cut. I'd send him stuff early in the week, and he would basically spend most of kind of Wednesday and Thursday cutting acetates for me for Friday. And a lot of the time I would be heading out of London, so I'd actually pick them up myself, and I'd have a new half a bag of fresh acetates for the weekend. But people used to just bike DATs over to the office or send them to the office, registered mail. So this is how I got all this exclusive music, and a lot of the time it becoming straight from the producer's studio, not even from the record labels. The producers themselves would be sending me these DATs, and I would get them even before they'd mastered the tracks. So he wasn't just cutting acetates; he was mastering, doing one-off masters of these songs, and then cutting them to dub plate as a one-off. And then sometimes, I wouldn't get the white label of that even for another 12 months or something. Sometimes it would be such a long time. It's not like now when someone finishes a track and it's up on uh, Spotify in 4 days. The window back then, people used to really like to do long promos of records. Sometimes the record labels would have so many releases to sit on that things would get held up. So yeah, this was one of those where I don't think I actually received a white label for this for months and months after I'd had this acetate cut. And I used to love the sound of this acetate. And I remember when I heard the white label I got sent, I was like, this just doesn't sound like the same record. It just sounds like a completely different version of it. And I couldn't work out whether Jesse had like taken that original mix he sent to me and put it to one side and redone it, or whether just Aaron's mastering was just phenomenal. And we had this just one-off version of this, and it sounded. This particular version is pretty well. You can see it's been very well played because it just sounded so good. So even though it's got a couple of pops and crackles on it, it sounds way better than the final release version. So I don't know, some magic happened there. I don't know if it was Aaron or if it was Jesse changing the mix, but yeah, this is truly a one-off version that nobody else had.
I think what you said about these tracks having so much space to breathe in the clubs before their release speak to, obviously the compilation's brilliant in terms of the tracks, but it speaks to how tracks could really stand or have a moment and stand the test of time and be remembered 20 years later, rather than today where you have to listen to 750 tracks a week just to stay on top of your music. It
Yeah.
almost feels like there's more tracks released in a month nowadays than maybe in an entire year back when this
Oh,
compilation
for
was coming
sure.
out.
The releases are incredible. I mean, when I used to make music, I used to have to go book a studio, go into the studio, come up with an idea, get it sounding great in the room, and then mix it and finish it in those 3 or 4 days because we didn't have the capability to go back and redo stuff. Like now, I must have about 150 Ableton sessions that are half finished, and I can just jump around. I can move around. I can take some sounds from one track, put them onto another, take the beats from one, put them on another. I'm constantly like copying and pasting stuff, and some of these are just never going to get finished, but they're always works in progress. We didn't have that technology back then, to go back and recall a mix, which I did have to do a couple of times back then, and it was an absolute pain in the ass. Um, it was just so difficult. We were working off SSL desks with like proper engineers in proper studios, and you had to walk out that studio at nine. It was sometimes, hopefully by midnight on the last day, but sometimes by 9 in the morning the next day. If you were really struggling with a track, you pull an all-nighter, but you had to walk out with something, and then it was done. You couldn't go back and tweak things or fiddle with things. We did some, one thing we would be able to do is do sort of some stereo editing. Sometimes I'd be like, that bit needs to be extended, or that breakdown's too long, and we would do some kind of clever stereo editing, but that was as far as it went. Sometimes we maybe layer a sound in. I did it for Xpander. Actually, the second breakdown in Xpander was way too long, and it just didn't have the impact coming back in at the end of the impact. So we ended up editing the master stereo channel to get the length right, and then I actually laid in a load of kind of sound effects on a separate stereo channel, and then we bounced that as the final master. So that was about as extreme as we could get in terms of fixing things after the day. But you had to walk out the studio with finished tracks. So um, yeah.
Uh, Speaking of studios, it's really cool. Last year, I went to Amsterdam to meet Sander Kleinenberg, and he
Oh
took
yeah.
me around on his motorbike, and we went past where you did some recordings, he said, of Airdrawndagger, and
Oh
he
yeah.
pointed to, he goes, you know what that is? I'm like, what? And he's pointing to the speed bump. He goes, that's called a Dremel. And he said that's how the name came for that track on Airdrawndagger. But the reason why
Yeah,
I
I
bring
thought it
up,
was, especially the way the Dutch say it, drempel.
yeah.
I thought it was a really funny word. So yeah, but yeah, no, we did the whole of Air Drawn Dagger in that little studio by the canal there, and I basically moved to Amsterdam for a year to work with Junkie XL. This is right before he kind of blew up and moved to Hollywood and blew up there and got into sound tracks and stuff. So yeah, he had an amazing studio with 2 rooms in it. He had a mix room, and then you had to kind of go underneath the street, and there's another room that was virtually under the canal, which was our kind of laboratory, which we set up with all our synths and modular stuff and crazy sound effects and stuff that we worked on in there. So yeah, it was an amazing time. I loved living in Amsterdam at that time. Working with Tom was incredible. Yeah, it was a really really amazing time.
Yeah, and Sander, when I was asking him about obviously his Four Seasons EP and my Lexicon, he described that studio session exactly what you're saying, where he locked himself in to the studio he was working in for 3 days because he was afraid someone else would come in and adjust all the analog settings. Because he's like, once you set it up, you had to
Yeah,
keep it set
yeah,
up. That track, My Lexicon, I mean, for me at least, it the way it opens up, it kind of serves as this perfect crux in CD1, where the beginning's all filtered down and ambient, and then you just, Sander opens it up. But it also
yeah.
opens up the mix as well. And today it stands as one of the most iconic tracks, not only from the compilation, but from that Millennium era underground sound.
Yeah, I wish Sandro had continued making more music in that genre. He was always pushing himself to try different things out, and I wish I continued down that road a little more because yeah, he had a really wonderful sound.
Yeah, yeah, no, that track's amazing. David, you want to talk a little bit? You want to ask some questions about the BT tracks? The one thing I want to say, Sasha, is the story of BT to me is the closest thing that could be made into a movie because I am so amazed that you have this producer in the DMV area, Maryland, Washington, D.C. He's making this music. He's thinking it's not hitting with an American crowd, and then he receives a phone call from you. This is the story he told me. He receives a phone call from you, and he's like, and you're like, mate, you don't know what your music is doing to dance floors over here. And you fly him out, and he gets to witness firsthand, like the music that he wasn't sure if was a success is changing people's lives on the dance floor. But
Yeah,
that story to me is just absolutely amazing.
yeah, that was an amazing hookup with Brian. Yeah, that EP he put out just absolutely floored me. I couldn't hang on a second. I couldn't stop listening to it. And the sound in it, it was just so unique. And I realized this guy was very special. So yeah, I had to get hold of him. I gave him a call. I ended up remixing the track for him for its UK release. But yeah, he still hadn't made it over. But again, it was one of those things. He sent me over all this music, and I was the only one that had the music. And it was basically most of the EMA album. He sent all that stuff to me. I got Aaron at 777 to cut it all, and then I remember he came to a gig. It was a gig for John Digweed actually at the barn. He used to do these gigs in this barn just south of London, and yeah, I remember I just basically played the last hour of my set was the EMA album, and Brian and everyone was going mental, and Brian was on the middle of the dance floor. I think at one point he had his top off. Yeah, it was pretty special. The relationship I had with Brian and our connection through music was just amazing. It was the backbone to this period of music and this sound.
Were you potentially surprised where he comes to you and he has this beautiful EMA album and he's like, "Hey, right in the middle, can you mix me 45 minutes of all these tracks together that I can put right in the middle of this album?"
Well, he'd heard me do it live, so he's like, I just want that.
Yeah.
So I'd been doing that kind of thing because I was the only one that had that music. So it wasn't like anyone could copy what I was doing. So I would do these mashups of all his different songs in the peak of my sets. And he was like, we've got to have that on the record. So yeah, that really turned out great.
When it came to opening CD2 with Fibonacci, I want to talk a little bit about the CD openings because obviously BT's Fibonacci sequence opens CD2. And
Yeah.
you obviously want to make a statement with the opening track of each CD because that
Yeah.
kind of
So,
defines the
so
vibe.
Yeah, I had the opening track of the first CD already nailed in my head. I knew what I was going to do, and I knew what I wanted to end with as well. So that one came together quite easily. The second CD, I must have tried 50 different records to try and open that with, and I couldn't get it right. And the clock was really ticking. I think I've been trying to get this right. I've been working with an editor in London who works with lots of amazing artists like Chemical Brothers and whatever. And he does a lot of the stuff. He did a lot of the stuff for the GU guys back then. A guy called Cheeky Paul. Yeah, I was in the studio with him, and I just couldn't get the opening of the second CD right. And I was pulling my hair out. I had the deck set up, the records all over the floor. And Brian sent me this a DAT over of this track, and I just sent it straight to Aaron at the cutting room to get it at 777 to get it cut, and it came back to me in the same day. And I was literally, it was probably about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. And it was the last day I had in the studio. We had to deliver the record the next day. Everything was booked. The mastering, the art was ready to go, the release, and I had to commit to something that night. And I remember the acetate just turned up, and I put it on, and then I realized that the next track I had lined up on the CD, track two, was in the same key of it or something, and it was like, okay, this was meant to be. And we sort of committed to it, and then finally, Cheeky Paul managed to get the final mix printed and off to the mastering company that night. But yeah, it was I must have spent a, a good few weeks trying to find the opening of that second CD, and just constantly changing my mind and not happy with it. And yeah.
Did CD1 come so naturally to you? Because it's almost like those two tracks, they feel like one big track, the way they're glued together.
Yeah, I think some of
And
those mixes were things I'd done live,
yeah,
so I knew that though they worked really well together. So but yeah, the second CD, it was like Brian dropped that record from heaven on. I was flailing in the studio and losing my mind a bit, and he just dropped it on me.
we'll finish up here. I want to be respectful of your time. I want okay, so the last two tracks, obviously two like of the anthemic tracks, two of the era defining tracks that still live today. Bedrock, Heaven Sent, and then Xpander, obviously. Let's start with Heaven Sent. Was was I'm interested to hear like what it was, how you went about choosing to, I mean, you and John were obviously performing so much together, for you to include his Bedrock 001 release on your Global Underground. What was
Well,
that
it
kind of decision like?
it had just been such an anthem for me and
Yeah.
John. Not that many people were playing it, but at the beginning, so it had been such an anthem for us to over the summer in Ibiza, especially for me, having the Ibiza residency. It was getting dropped every single week, so it just felt like it was the sound of that summer and the sound of Ibiza. So, it went on to become even bigger, after it went on the Train Spotting soundtrack and became a global hit. But at that time, it felt really tight to the Ibiza residency. So it felt like it was something that was a no-brainer, that it needed to be included. The same with Xpander, really. Both those tracks have been ending my sets with. So, and they've both been tearing the roof off there. So it felt like they really belonged on the CD.
Yeah, definitely. Last question about Xpander, just because I have a lot of friends in Los Angeles, and like when I listen through sets in your history, obviously your mindset's always on the future of this sound, pushing the sound forward, elevating new artists, and you would always do kind of like, or sometimes you do like a cheeky ender, like a outro version of Xpander to your sets to give your longtime fans a little something. But I'm seeing videos now of two gigs recently at Liverpool and then at Sound in Los Angeles of you playing out the track to the dance floor. And what's it like? Like, you probably never could have imagined when you're producing a track in the moment that 25 years later it's gonna, still have this life to its own.
Well, the poignant thing about the Liverpool gig is that the promoter passed away the week of the gig, and I had only worked for him a couple of times recently, and it had been his like kind of lifelong ambition to put a gig on for me and John, and unfortunately he passed away the week of the show, and apparently it was his favorite track. He always used to close his sets with it when he DJ'd, and I said, is there something special we can do as a tribute for him? All his family and friends were at the gig. Everyone was very raw and emotional. And I told them I was going to play Xpander as the last track as a tribute to him. And they put his picture up on the screen. And it was a really intense moment. And I'd not heard Xpander out in the club um, for ages. I don't really play it very often. It was because it kind of came through as a request from his family, and it was such a poignant moment. But it just sounded absolutely incredible on we had a D&B sound system, which is the best in the world. And when you listen to things on a D&B system, they sometimes take on another life. Uh, so yeah, I wanted to experience that again. It was a late night thing at Sound, and I was playing with Marsh, and we'd just done the Injunid gig, and it kind of felt like it was in sync with some of the stuff that he was playing, and I wanted to hear it again. So it'll probably be the last time I play it for a long time now.
Yeah. No, that's awesome though. And that's all the questions I have. I just wanted to try and help, help you guys with what you're doing with the auction. And
I
I'm
appreciate it
just
very
really
much.
appreciative of your time. I know you're super busy, so
No, that's cool, man. Thanks for all your support.
yeah, yeah, it's cool, man. David, if you have any questions, but thank you very much.
Yeah, I just have a couple more. I mean, the things you've already talked about, but I think it would just be good to get it on here. So like, I mean, so you've talked a lot about how you sent stuff over to 777 to get cut, but can you just kind of like explain how like you would obviously you were getting acetates cut all the time to play out, but you would
Yeah.
also specifically get them made for the compilations, and that was because you wanted like a fresh copy. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes I'd be already played something out over the summer, and these things really were my tools of the trade. So I didn't look after them like a vinyl junkie who's got that really expensive deck at home and is really careful dropping the needle on. I'd throw the needle on, might have had a couple of drinks, so things didn't might have gone in the wrong sleeve on the way back, or maybe not even gone in a sleeve, that kind of stuff. So yeah, when it came to recording the mix down for the compilation, I pretty much had everything fresh cut again.
Yeah. And was that only for like the unreleased stuff, or would you even? I'm curious. Would you cut acetates for stuff that had been released, but you just wanted like an even better copy, like from
No,
the deck?
not really. I mean, if something had come out and it had been mastered, and unless it was something like the Medway track where the version that I had was better, but that didn't happen that often. But every now and then, some magic like that would happen, and I would want the acetate version.
hmm Okay. And then can you just talk a little about like what it was like for you to transition away from vinyl and from the CD and from the acetates to like CDJs? Like when did that happen?
Well, it
And
happened actually. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know the name of this mastering engineer, but I was going away to South America to do a tour, and I had a huge bunch of acetates that I needed cutting, literally a whole box of them. So Aaron wasn't around. I think he was on holiday for a couple of weeks. So there was another engineer that stepped in and cut me all these acetates. And I got to South America, and as soon as I started playing them, the beginnings of the beginnings of the acetates would kind of disintegrate. And they jumped, and they became unplayable after like two shows. And I was on the road for like 2 months before I was going back to London. So I
Mhm.
had a tour in South America. I was going to America, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I literally, overnight, I had to learn how to use the CDJs, which were a little more complicated than they are now, a little more fiddly than they are now. They're so easy to use now, and they have so many features, but they were quite raw back then. And I just had to burn myself, a load of CDs. And just that I kind of just had to jump in and get onto the CDJ thing. And within a couple of gigs, I was like, okay, because I was spending a lot of money on those acetates, and and they were definitely kind of hit and miss sometimes. With you get to a show and the decks aren't set up properly. It just became like an ease of use thing with the CDJs, and I got my head around them pretty quickly. But yeah, I was kind of forced into it by a bad batch.
Awesome.
Uh, yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah. No,
Well,
yeah, this is great.
yeah.
Yeah, you
Thanks a
got
lot.
everything.
Yeah, we got everything we need. I'll
All
edit
right,
these down and send them to Dan. But yeah, man, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time, and I hope you have
cool,
a
man.
nice. I don't know. It's Thursday. Hope you have a nice weekend, and hope everything's going well.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Yep.